Okay, everyone, a very warm welcome to you for this face-to-face session. I have to say, this is a conversation I've been really looking forward to having. Sitting with me here, as you'll know, is Dato Dr. Abdul Halim. As you know, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award for his experience in Islamic finance, Islamic banking in Malaysia. Very much a pioneer in that area. And he's covered, well, a broad range of different sections or areas, if we can say it like that, from stockbroking to insurance to banking itself. So we're looking forward to having a wide-ranging conversation with him about his experience, getting his thoughts on the challenges, the pitfalls, perhaps the problems facing Islamic banking, and then, of course, where the future lies. The last 10-15 minutes of the session, it would be great to get your questions. So, feel free to put your hands up and put your questions to Dr. Halim. There are no barriers between us in this room. So, yeah, any thoughts and questions, do keep them in mind. But, Dr. Halim, I thought we'd start by, in light of your award, I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about your background and perhaps your early life. And I was curious to know when your interest, your fascination with Islamic finance first started. What was it, would you say, that put you on this path?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mariam, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm very thankful to the WIF for inviting me to participate in this conference. It is by accident, actually, I became Islamic banker. When I began work in 1970 as a lecturer in a university, there was no talk at that time about Islamic banks. Well, there was talk, but not very serious one. In 1970. In 1975, I think the first Islamic bank was established in Dubai. Only at that time, somehow, the interest was rekindled in Malaysia. I left the bank in 1977 and worked in some other places, including a conventional bank. And I joined Bank Islam Malaysia when it was set up. You asked me how did I look forward? Actually, just by accident. When the Islamic Bank was about to be formed, the government set up a committee. This committee consisted of the central bank governor and the bankers from Malaysia, conventional bankers, and also the legal expert and the Sharia scholars. Now, I was working in the bank. My chairman should be a member of that committee, but he knew that I was having some religious background in terms of my education. And I think he was very busy, so he appointed me to represent that particular bank, which is Bank Bumiputra Sdn Bhd, to be a committee member.
Why don't we rewind a little bit? Because you graduated with your degree in economics from the University of Malaya in 1965. You completed your doctorate at Oxford University 5 years later.
Yes.
And then you begin your academic career in Malaysia, and then you kind of move from academia into banking. Was that a difficult transition for you?
It wasn't difficult because in Malaysia at that time, the country was growing very fast. The banking industry was growing as well. I thought after teaching for about 5 years, actually I wanted to be a lecturer all my life. My aim was to become a professor.
So how did this end up happening? You changed your mind.
Yes, halfway through, I mean, after teaching for 4 or 5 years, I began to realize that I mean, pardon me, those people who teach in the university. But for me, I thought if I remain in the university, I shall be talking about things. I shall be talking about banking, about development, without doing it. I was yearning for doing rather than talking.
So you became quite restless as a teacher, and you realized that's not what you wanted to do. Was it inspiration then, or frustration that caused you to leave academia?
It was, it was not a frustration. I thought it was a step forward because I had wanted to be a lecturer. I had become a lecturer and fulfilled the task as a lecturer. So I want to to do something else.
So ambition played a role.
Yes.
You wanted to sink your teeth into a new challenge and prove you could be successful at doing that.
Ambition from the standpoint of profession, not so much to get wealth and money and
But even while you were making that transition into banking, you continued to make contributions in terms of writing articles, and your links with academic institutions continued.
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit about that, because you're focusing on the Sharia aspect of Islamic finance. And, you know, there are still problems that we talk about today. Has anything much changed? You were writing about it back then when you look at where we are today?
Well, Islamic banking and finance has come a long way since then. I think the first bank was set up in 1975, as I have alluded to earlier. Bank Islam Malaysia was formed in 1983. And I was fortunate enough to become the first managing director of that bank. Now, since then, the Islamic banking, Islamic finance has moved very fast, in the sense that within 30 years or so, we have been able to come up with a banking system that perhaps for a century before that, Muslims were wishing that there was such a banking system. Because before that, for a Muslim, you cannot do anything without going against the Islamic Sharia, because you can't put your money in banks because you will be facing with riba. You can't borrow from the bank. You cannot take insurance. Almost you cannot do everything.
But all these things, when you were starting out, all these things were very much in their infancy, were they not? As you say, we've come a long way, but in 1983, when you were appointed to head Malaysia's first Islamic bank,
yes,
you had to get the right staff in place, you had to develop the products, you had to make sure the services were being delivered effectively to build up that customer base. I'm just wondering, in those early days when you were starting this huge operation from scratch, what was the biggest problem you came up against?
The problems was there everywhere.
Everywhere.
But the problem need to be solved. Either we solve it very completely, or we solve it partially. So if the problem is not cannot be totally solved, you move to another problem. So I think I have been able to do in a very modest way to organize the bank, so to speak.
Are there any, I'm just wondering, are there any, it's quite a unique experience to be starting an operation like that, heading an operation like that, in a part of banking that perhaps wasn't very established. It's not the industry, it wasn't the industry back then that it is now. Are there any stories or personalities or people that you work with, that anything memorable that has stuck in your mind from those early days?
Well, there was a particular one that I would share with you. This is a happy one, so to speak. Now, I was alone when I was appointed, supposed to be the managing director, nobody else. So I was given a free hand to organize the bank. So you have bankers around you, but all are conventional bankers. So what I did was I tried to recruit bankers from conventional banks, and I made sure that I took one or two from a bank, from a number of banks. At that time, the central bank was discouraging bank from pinching the staff, but it allowed Bank Islam.
But you did it anyway.
It allowed
How
Bank
did you
Islam
how
to
did
do
you
it.
manage to poach them? Was that difficult?
Yes, this is a story. I mean, mostly those who wanted to work in Islamic bank were Muslims. So they would come to me. They would ask that we would like to join you. And then I asked, what about the salary? Your salary is very high. Now we are not going to be able to afford to pay you the high salary. So always, invariably, the answer is it possible to get what I'm getting right now? Or, if not possible, I'm willing to come for lower, slightly lower, but not very much lower, in the sense that it might affect my livelihood. So this is a kind of experience that I didn't expect it to happen. So I took a number from the various banks, and they are conventional bankers. And then, of course, we take our Sharia scholar and set up the Sharia Council. Then there is a discussion between the officers of the bank that I have taken in various areas of banking management and the Sharia scholars as to how to set up products that you said. Now, I would say that.
Did you have a relationship with a lot of these scholars from your days as an academic? Did that?
Yes, I was fortunate in the sense that my education, primary education and secondary education, was in Islamic studies, Islamic schools, Arabic based. But I studied Arabic in Malaysia, which is not an Arab country. So I can't speak really very, very fluently in Arabic. I could understand the writing, but I don't try to speak to me in Arabic after this. I would not be able to answer you.
But were there times in those early days where you thought this could be a spectacular failure because, you know, we're trying to do something, we're trying to establish something that you know, it hasn't been tried and tested, it's something new. Were you worried?
No, I wasn't worried.
And you weren't stressed?
No, not stressed.
He was telling me this before backstage. I feel like there isn't anything that would rattle him. You seem very calm.
Well, Malaysia at that time was growing. I knew that if eventually I lost the job or eventually the bank was discontinued, I would somehow be able to get some jobs to carry on living, so to speak. So I was not worried about the failure. I was worried whether I could make the success out of it or not. Worried in that sense, worried of a challenge. You want to work harder, you want to push forward, you want to try to do as perfect as possible.
Right. And so when did you start to realize that, you know, you were building your team and you had the right team in place? When did things start to get easier?
Things didn't get easier, neither did it get difficult for quite some times, 3 or 4 years down the road, when the bank was making initially small profit, but eventually quite reasonable profit. There were times, because the economy was subject to cycle, there were times when there was a depression. Then that is a bit worrying, but then the worry is the whole national worry, so to speak. But other than that, it is, alhamdulillah, smooth sailing.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more then about the nature of Islamic finance. What is your response to the critics, the skeptics who say that despite all the work done by clerics, lawyers, bankers, people like yourself, that modern-day Islamic finance still goes against some of the fundamental principles of Islam. What is your response to that?
No, my response, if you take the principle of Islam as Sharia, all the banks have now Sharia councils. And the Sharia council are manned by people of high knowledge of Sharia. And also there are international organization of Sharia, international conferences of Sharia scholars. Of course, there are differences sometimes in terms of interpretation between mazhab and between areas. But all derive the principle from the Quran, from Hadith, and from other sources of Sharia. So to say that it is not in line with Sharia, what is in line?
Well, I guess to a lot of outside observers, there is still this, they still sort of grapple with many of the concepts. They find it somewhat mysterious. I guess, a casual observer might say that a lot of the products that you have are very similar to those that you have in conventional banking. You offer mortgages, car loans, insurance. The purpose of all these things is the same as the conventional banking products. It's just that your language, you're calling it, it's couched in, Islamic language.
There are there are things that I suppose outwardly it looks similar on the conventional side and on the Islamic side. Now, if you take the musharakah, the concept of musharakah in terms of the companies, limited companies, it is just like shares, limited companies' shares. But on musharakah, the concept is solidly based under the concept of musharakah. The other one is sometimes it is interest-based. Now, let me give an example. You take a chicken. If you slaughter it according to the Islamic way, and then it is halal for Muslim. But if you do not slaughter it, it is not halal for Muslim, but it is allowed for non-Muslim. Now, if you make a curry of the two chicken and present to you the curry of the two chicken, ask you to say which one has been slaughtered, which one has not been slaughtered, you would not be able to tell. In the same manner, the products of Islamic bank might look similar to the product of conventional bank.
Because the outcome is the same.
Yes, the outcome is the same. But behind that, the aqad, the contract are different. And the purpose, the ruh, are different.
We were talking a little bit earlier about a book by Haris Irfan called Heaven's Bankers. And in this book, he claims that many of the practitioners of Islamic finance have abandoned the true aims, if you like, in order to keep up with Western banks. Do you agree? Are you concerned with the way it's evolving?
I do not agree, and I'm concerned. But in a way, what he says is quite correct, in the sense that this is my view. We Islamic bankers and finance haven't done our job completely yet. In Islamic economy consists of three sectors of the population. The Ummah consists of three sectors. The government sector, the private sector. There is another sector which is often left out. This is the social welfare sector.
And you've said that this is where there is a void in Islamic banking. This is an area that they need to expand
Yes.
into? And are there signs that this is happening already in Malaysia? How difficult would it be to get involved in charity?
There are signs that it is happening because at the moment, for the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, people begin to talk more and more about the concept of wakaf, whether this could be included under the Islamic banking or not. That wakaf is charity. That concerns the social welfare sector. But I have a humble proposal, so to speak, that Islamic finance, Islamic banking and finance should now include the provision of facilities and services to serve the social welfare sector. I'm suggesting that the central bank, the monetary authorities, give license to banks, Islamic bank, or better still, Islamic banking group, to set up Sadaqah house as an institution like Sharikat Takaful, as an institution to be their subsidiaries whose task would be to collect funds.
How would they pay for it? How would the banks pay for it? Would they make a profit on something like this? How would it work?
I'm suggesting that the bank should do this at no loss to itself. The central bank should, subject to the Sharia Council decisions of the international level as well as the banking level as to how the fee can be collected. The bank should collect sadaqah from the private sector, leave this zakat and wakaf perhaps for the government sector because it is doing already. But collect sadaqah, the various type of sadaqah from the private sector, and we use this sadaqah in particular, for various products, for various sadaqah type to be given to the poor and the needy. But one particular product that I like is based on a hadith. Allow me to read the hadith. إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية أو علم ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له. The Prophet said that when a person dies, all channels of good deeds, his good deeds, are closed, except for 3. First, sadaqah jariyah. Second, the knowledge, useful knowledge that he imparted during his lifetime. And the third is his children, his son or daughter, who prays for him. Now let us very briefly look at these 3 sources. Knowledge, the useful knowledge. I think many of us do not have that opportunity, except that if you are teachers, and more so religious teachers, or you work in da'wah bodies, then you impart the knowledge will be used after your death, and the reward will flow from that. But not many people will have the opportunity. Now, the sons and daughters, some of us might not have sons and daughters. Some might have sons and daughters, but they are not pious. They do not even say the dua for themselves. How do you expect them to say the dua for their parents?
The banks are not going to do it.
The bank not going to do it. Or perhaps, yes.
But this sadaqah, you're saying, so this is an area, how could the banks get involved? What is your idea?
Okay.
Yeah.
The bank would collect sadaqah, as I said, mainly from the private sector. Private sector, both institutional and individual. And then this sadaqah jariyah, the bank should not use that fund to give to the poor and the needy. use that fund for investment.
So that's not charity. It's ongoing investment.
Ongoing charity.
Would they be able to charge a fee on something like that?
Well, I'm suggesting that the bank should be allowed to charge fee and also to distribute the business among its subsidiaries so that it can earn income, just like investment management fee, for example. And then the profit derived from the amount invested, that amount is to be given to charity year in, year out. So the sadaqah will be ongoing sadaqah or sadaqah in perpetuity.
You speak about expanding into a new area there, but I suppose some people would argue that there are already a number of challenges, constraints on growth for the sector, and the problem that has consistently come up that hasn't been resolved is the lack of standardization. It's the different interpretations between banks and jurisdictions about what is acceptable under Sharia, under Islamic law. Will that ever be resolved? Can it be resolved?
You're talking about differences in Sharia interpretations.
Yes.
Well, I think in the first place, we differ in terms of mazhab, and different mazhab in some cases would allow certain things, some other mazhab would not allow. Now, to the extent that that is along that line in Islam, we are allowed. Even on matters of ibadah, on matters of prayers, there are some differences between the practice of one particular mazhab against the other mazhab.
But in finance, it doesn't work because it worries investors.
Well, in some cases, you need a certain, you need investors not throughout the world, certain parts of the world. Say you issue a sukuk, and then that sukuk does contain some kind of fatwa which is acceptable in particular area and not acceptable in another area. But the sukuk is totally subscribed by the countries that subscribe to that particular area. So that should be sufficient for that purpose. That is one point. Another point is that there is an active task, active work of harmonization among the Islamic Bank, among the various areas now.
Is that process moving fast enough?
Well, I think it is quite fast enough. That there are many services now acceptable globally than before.
Let me give you one example. With one particular bank, HSBC decided to close its Islamic finance operations in several markets because the business wasn't profitable enough. You're well aware of that. Again, the challenge there was different interpretations of Islamic law. We know that contracts drawn up in Malaysia may not be recognized elsewhere. So, you speak about the process moving along, but nevertheless, there isn't enough clarity. There isn't enough. The rules and the regulations are not. What more needs to be done so that banks can deliver products and services more quickly to kind of speed up the turnaround time?
I think, I suppose if you ask me, and then perhaps a bank could abandon that particular product, but at the same time, it could begin another product which is acceptable, which is near enough to the purposes, and that new product might be acceptable.
I'm wondering about perceptions or misconceptions that might be out there about Islamic banking. Have you found yourself ever dealing with banks that don't want to trade with Islamic financial institutions or are worried about it because they might think it would taint their own reputation in some way?
Well, basically, actually, Islamic banks is primarily to serve the Muslims, to do banking along the line of their Sharia. Actually, when we began Islamic banking in Malaysia, never that we think that it will be utilized in a large way by non-Muslims. This is a new development which really surprised me. In fact, within 30 years, a lot of non-Muslim, whether it is individuals or institutional, do take up to Islamic banking.
Dato, how do you explain that? Because it's been quite a remarkable year for the Islamic finance industry, hasn't it? We've seen 4 non-Muslim countries, the UK followed by Hong Kong, South Africa, Luxembourg, all selling Islamic bonds or sukuk. Last month, Goldman Sachs issued an Islamic bond, and before the end of the year, I think we're going to have Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, Societe Generale, they're going to do the same. What has sparked this interest in Islamic finance from non-Muslim countries and institutions?
It surprised me. It surprised me. I did not anticipate when we began Islamic banking before. Maybe I'm short-sighted or whatever it is, but I did not anticipate. So I think the whole world was waiting for an alternative banking system, so to speak, to conventional banking system, and they would want to try. Another thing, perhaps, people are looking at the future and thinking that Islamic countries may be achieving high level of income in the future, and there will be a source of fund from Islamic countries.
It's about attracting alternative sources of funding.
Yes.
Is that necessarily a good thing for the industry itself?
Well, it is a good thing if it is done along the Islamic contract.
Right. So, yeah, because on the one hand, it means that, bonds and, certain financial instruments will be traded more widely. It will become more liquid, if you like. But on the other hand, would you be concerned about the way it's being practiced, about distortions?
This distortion should be supervised in the sense that even at the moment there are some differences again. When a conventional institution raises the fund, some countries in some jurisdiction, it will not allow the fund to be utilized for non-Islamic purposes. In some countries, it allows. But for those that do not allow to be utilized, they build up the kind of supervision, the supervisory bodies for that particular financing to make sure that it is not wrongly utilized.
But you still think there is a risk that as Islamic finance expands, it becomes less Islamic?
المصارف الإسلامية أن تفقد طابعها الإسلامي كلا.
We try to correct it in the sense that if an institution issue a bond and use the money for non-Islamic, you would not allow anymore that institution to raise further funds.
You think the right checks and balances are in place?
Yes. Beginning to be in place.
Beginning to be in place, but there is still a risk of misuse.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you ever really balance or reconcile the true ideals of faith and religion with the need to make a profit?
Oh, yes. I mean, Muslims have got to earn income for a living. And in trade, the income comes from a profit. Of course, there is not profiteering, there is no monopoly, and so on and so forth. But profit is legitimate.
But in order to boost profits, will Islamic banking have to replicate conventional banks more and more in the products and services that it offers? Many would say that it already does so.
No. I think Islamic banks should be more cautious in the sense that, the financing is always asset-based. And also, I mean, if banks do the sadaqah, if sadaqah become a big factor, then there is a balance in terms of distributing income and so on and so forth.
Do you think that a lot of people would have a problem, though, with banks getting involved in sadaqah, with charity? The idea that you mentioned, even an Islamic bank, do you think a lot of people would say there's something not quite right about that? It's not something that they would be comfortable with, banks getting involved in this area?
I think banks are in the best position to do this sadaqah jariyah. In the first place, sadaqah jariyah involve collecting funds, distributing funds, transferring funds. This is the work of the bank. No other institution are involved in this. And then secondly, when the money is obtained, because we stress sadaqah jariyah, it's got to be invested, management, wealth management, fund management. This is again the work of the bank. No other institution can do that. Then, of course, I mean, in terms of the integrity, very difficult to measure integrity. But I would have thought banks having, every day transferring large sum of money and under the supervision of the central bank should be very high in terms of integrity level as compared to other institutions.
You spoke about Islamic finance, Islamic banking being more cautious. It's been viewed as being, relatively safe, or relatively immune to financial crisis, but the Malaysia-based Islamic Financial Services Board recently identified certain institutions that are perhaps overly exposed to assets like real estate in the Middle East. Is that something to bear in mind? Is that something to be concerned about?
Yes, something to bear in mind, something to be concerned about. These are the possibilities. I mean, these are the pitfalls that banks should look out for. I did say that banks should try to do financing on an asset basis. It might be conservative, but it avoids the pitfalls.
We were speaking about Western banks getting involved in Islamic finance, and Goldman Sachs tried to enter the market 3 years ago, but their bonds were criticized by Islamic scholars. You were just talking about the pitfalls. What does that tell us about the pitfalls, if you like, Islamic finance?
I suppose the intention to use the funds not along the Islamic line. There is no assurance that the fund would be utilized on Islamic finance basis.
The rapid expansion of Islamic banking has been mainly through Islamic sections in conventional banks rather than in pure Islamic banks. Just going back to the question of whether or not Islamic finance could increasingly start to replicate conventional banking, is that not inevitable in some ways, given the institutions that it's being practiced within?
This is because Islamic banks have just begun the operation. The size are very small, but I do not know. There are talk now about setting up mega Islamic banks for the purpose of size, for the purpose of competition. Whether it can take on, whether it will be followed, and perhaps it can take on the conventional banks by competition.
Even in countries like the Gulf states or in Southeast Asia, Islamic banking is there, but I think it rarely accounts for more than a third of market share. In Indonesia, for example, Islamic banking currently has less than 5% market share. When you think about the huge untapped Muslim populations in India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Egypt, Morocco, how can the industry realize its vast potential for growth?
That is a very difficult question. In some jurisdictions at the moment, they do not allow Islamic bank to be set up. Well, you can't say anything. It is a political, geopolitical kind of decisions. To the extent that it is allowed, to the extent that Muslims can organize Islamic banks, they will organize. So I suppose that will slow down the pace. But even then, as we have discussed earlier, within 30 years, the kind of growth that has been achieved is quite remarkable.
Do you see growth continuing at that same pace, though, when you talk about the challenges within countries with vast Muslim populations? Many of these rapid growth market countries are facing ongoing political and economic instability. How much of an obstacle is that going to be for growth, Islamic finance growth in these places?
It's a big obstacle. It's a big obstacle. One thing is that Islamic banking has been developing in Islamic countries in a far more smooth way as compared, for example, to political development. You see, in political development, there are some difficulties here and there. But in Islamic banking, almost well, not to say every country, large number of Islamic countries, as if it is being synchronized. They move step by step. Within 30 years, they have achieved the level that they have achieved today. Quite remarkable.
So do you think in some ways the potential for growth is greater in non-Muslim countries?
No, no.
Is the short answer.
It is the same.
As the era of cheap money comes to an end, central banks are withdrawing stimulus. Is that going to see growth slow down, especially in the banking industry, and could that too affect growth?
Yes, if the era of cheap money stops, yes.
An obstacle to Islamic finance growth.
But these are cycle. Usually, well, it is economic cycle in a way. Whether it is short cycle or long cycle, the cycle will come back.
So at this point, I'll throw it out to the audience. If there are any questions that you want to put to Dato, please raise your hands, and we'll have someone make their way to you. Yep, there's a gentleman over there.
My name is...
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Thank you very much for very insightful answers given by the honored speaker. And many very good questions were put before you, sir. I am from Islami Bank Bangladesh Limited. I am managing director of that bank. This bank has started operation in March 1983. This is the first Islamic Sharia-based bank in Southeast Asia. So, with the success of this bank, now there are 8 independent Islamic banks in our country, and also 17 conventional banks having Islamic banking windows or branches. And our market share in the private sector is more than 30%, with more than 18% growth. Among the 65 countries, Bangladesh is 10th on the basis of asset size. But if you consider financial inclusion, we represent 35% of the total global Islamic banking, as we have got more than 11.7 million Islamic banking accounts against 38 million Islamic banking accounts all over the globe. In that pace, as you have mentioned about Islamic banking, that is, Islamic banking should include sadaqah. Sir, in my opinion, Islamic banking itself is a sadaqah, and it is a sadaqah jariyah. And again, the point is, why Islamic banking is for? One part is mechanism, that is banning riba, and the other part is achieving Islamic Sharia goal of Islamic banking or Islamic economics. In that case, concerning if we consider most of the Islamic banks in the world, they, in most cases, relentlessly trying to become a Sharia bank in terms of mechanism, not in terms of maqasid. While we consider sukuk or any other such products, headcount-wise, our penetration is...
So what is the question?
The question is, if we do not actually deal in achieving maqasid Sharia, only with mechanism, how far Islamic banking can achieve its goal? Thank you, sir. Question also.
What I'm suggesting is that the Islamic bank and finance take on another task, that is to collect sadaqah and distribute this sadaqah to the needy and the poor. I did not get your question, actually. I did not say that the bank should try to reduce the existing task and concentrate on sadaqah, but add on sadaqah as another area of operation.
Let's take another question, yeah?
Sorry,
Right there.
I want to add some. I did not say about avoiding sadaqah. Rather,
but just sorry, 1 second, because we'll come back to you if there's time, but we have a couple of other questions here, please. Yeah.
Iftikhar Ali, my question is that there is a certain amount of dichotomy in the opinion of the religious boards in so many countries like Pakistan, Malaysia, Sudan, Iran, etc. This is impeding the growth of Islamic finance because the customer is quite confused.
Right, so, yes.
You have a very long journey, sir. You have been in the vanguard of the Islamic finance dawa. So what is your opinion regarding the need to standardize these, as accounting boards have standardized procedures? Likewise, the Sharia situation can also be standardized so that the customer is not confused, which in my very humble view is a great impediment to the growth of finance. Number two, you mentioned, sir, sadaqah to be a responsibility of the bank, which is understandable because they have the resources and the commitment and the wherewithals to do this. But sadaqah by definition also would require managers who are sadiq and ameen. What is your view, sir?
Okay, so first question on we keep coming back to this issue of the lack of standardization.
Differences actually in the nature of Islamic Sharia, differences of opinion. You cannot, I suppose, in our lifetime, you cannot actually try to do away totally because Allah has allowed us differences of opinion, and therefore mazhab has existence in our society.
If it's something that we can't resolve because there is no one single authority there, how best can it be managed so as to bring more clarity and less confusion to the customers?
Yes. I suppose what is happening is in the correct trajectory, in the sense that there are discussion going on. The various countries will form the various bodies like IOFI and so on and so forth, where they will be discussing across mazhab to see whether they can unite or whether they can standardize the contracts or not. In some cases, it has been happening. It has happened, but things are quite slow. But we are moving towards that. But in the meantime, I would have thought that we might allow for some differences in different parts of the world. You said the customers are confused. Now, suppose a product is not allowed in Malaysia, but allowed in the Middle East. So long as the product, that particular product, is to be utilized in Malaysia, and the other product is to be utilized in the Middle East, that should not raise any confusion. The confusion would be for international products like sukuk and so on and so forth.
Gentleman there has the microphone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Halim. I come from Somalia, and my name is Dr. Ali Abdullahi from AMSAS Consulting, based in both Australia and Somalia and Kenya. My question is very simple. It touches upon competition. Islamic banks face two forms of regulation. Do you think it's high time they should be exempted from one regulation and be accepted only in one? That is in the sense of the banking acts of most countries or the Islamic acts, which, for example, in Malaysia. And I really thank you very much for your contribution in Islamic finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The answer is actually this is geopolitical. This is a political decision of the country. Ideally, Islamic banks, all the Islamic operations should be subject to Sharia. But not many countries have Sharia as a rule of law. And therefore, we have to live with this kind of dichotomy in law. On matters of Sharia in Malaysia, for example, on matters of Islamic banking, we are subject to Islamic Banking Act, but the other part will be conventional act. Well, we have to make do for this stage. It is more political development than Islamic development.
There's a gentleman over here.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor and Mariam. My name is Saeed Rashid Al-Suwaidi. I'm from Dubai Department of Economic Development. Doctor, what about your views? And I'm asking about your views, whether in the current stage or current period of time or in the future. My question is to what extent the fatwa, or let us say the Islamic consultancy, which came from scholars, fatwa, how go together with the new approaches in Islamic products? Are the two parts in the same? Are they in the same way, in the same, let us say, movement? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. In Malaysia, we have the Sharia Council at the central bank. At the Bank Negara Malaysia, the country's Sharia Council. Whatever decision bank make must be subjected to that Sharia Council. If the Sharia Council not allowed, and then no bank in Malaysia could do it. So the answer is all the products and services that are offered by Islamic Bank in Malaysia have been approved by the Sharia Council of the Central Bank of Malaysia.
A new product came. We should, let us say, go with this new way. So
yes. How
do you think about this the two parts goes?
The process would be, while there is a central Sharia Council at the central bank, every bank also would have its own Sharia Council. Now, if there is a product to be initiated by a bank, in the first place, the bank Sharia Council must approve that. After that, it is submitted to the Sharia Council of the central bank. Once the Sharia Council of the central bank allowed, then it can be implemented by all the banks in the country, not just the original bank. But of course, the original bank can then implement. But if it is not allowed, it needs to be modified. Will have to be done.
Ethna Trainer. I'm just wondering, are you encouraged by the growth in sukuk from non-Islamic countries? And particularly, we're looking at the Islamic sukuk that was oversubscribed and very successful. We've also seen a growth of about 15% this year alone, coming from non-Muslim countries and from non-Islamic banks. We've seen the UK, we've seen South Africa involved in this as well. Is this a trend, or do you think it is good business?
First on Sharia. Actually, the Sharia does not require non-Muslim to follow Sharia way if it doesn't affect the Muslims. Like chicken, the non-Muslim do not have to consume unslaughtered slaughtered chicken. But if they do, and then I suppose we are quite neutral. We do not encourage, neither discourage. But in the same manner, I suppose, in terms of Sharia, we should take it neutrally. But in terms of economic development, perhaps then this can be a source of capital for the development of Islamic resources, so to speak, Islamic countries. So long as the funds are utilized in accordance with the requirements of the Sharia, so long as no Sharia restrictions have been encroached, I think I'm encouraged by the development.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Halim. Actually, I'm Ashraf Suhail. I'm heading corporate banking group in Bubian Bank, which is one of the Islamic banks in Kuwait. Actually, I worked for 3 Islamic banks, and I believe that Islamic banks are under pressure because they are competing in markets where conventional banks, they dominate. And maybe this put pressure on these banks because at the end they target profit to deviate a little from establishing a real Islamic banking and copying the conventional banks in terms of products. And also sometimes the Sharia committees are themselves, they are under pressure to help the Islamic banks, so they try to show flexibility. So what's your view on the medium term? Will we really establish a proper Islamic banking, or it will be a hybrid between both? Thank you.
There is no hybrid, actually.
But in order to compete with the conventional banks, are they going to will they find themselves replicating or kind of becoming more of a hybrid in order to boost profits?
The contract will still have to follow the Sharia. If it is outside the Sharia, then it is not Islamic bank.
So you compromise on profit in that case. Okay, so we're running out of time. Let's take 2 more questions. One at the back there.
My name is Abdullah Shahi, Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank. I have a question to the doctor. I understand that you guys have a centralized Sharia at the central bank. In the meanwhile, with us here in UAE, we still don't have that one, but I guess we are moving in that direction. Normally, when you have Sharia at different banks, those guys, in order to originate a product or so, they go through a process. And this, of course, takes time and efforts and so on and so on. Eventually, they come up with a particular product. As soon as this product has been approved by the Sharia in the bank itself, then it goes to the central bank in Malaysia. My question is this: when it gets approved by central bank in Malaysia Sharia board there, does it now becomes a public property? Because me as a bank, for example, putting all of these efforts into developing this new product, at least it should be kind of, intellectual property. How am I protected exactly?
Thank you. Very, 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 very thought-provoking question. Sharia, well, a fatwa I think cannot be made a kind of professional property, so to speak. We in Malaysia, the moment it is approved by the Central Bank Sharia Council, it belongs to all banks. All banks can implement it without having to pay anybody anything. This is, I personally speaking, I do not agree that any fatwa should be stamp mark to say anybody who wants to do this must pay us because fatwa is a fatwa. I mean, that might be a personal answer, but that is my feeling.
We're running over now, so let's just take one more question.
Hello. Thank you very much for this, actually. My name is Matar Al-Muafi, and Dr. Abdul Halim mentioned that the Islamic banking for Muslims in Islamic countries. So how he can seize the cooperation between Islamic banking and the conventional banking? Because actually Islamic banking cannot work individually by themselves without the help and cooperation with conventional banking. Thank you very much.
We've spoken about the competition between the two, but
cooperation, not competition.
Yeah, that's right. We've spoken about competition. What about cooperation then? Because it can't function in a vacuum.
Cooperation, so long as it doesn't touch the Sharia rules and regulations. If it is assistance in terms of, say, staff training, computer training, and so on and so forth, it is encouraged. I would accept that, but cooperation in terms of raising the fund through interest basis, I would not agree to that.
All right, well, we're out of time. I'm sorry for those of you that didn't get the opportunity to ask a question, but I think Dato is going to be here for a little bit, so maybe you can approach him and put your questions to him then. But please join me in thanking Dr. Abdul Halim for his wonderful insights, sharing his perspective with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.